we need to restore confidence in the public about using rail, and that has taken a severe dent. And currently, obviously, with social distancing, the capacity is severely limited. So we are having to say to people, this is for essential journeys only, not for leisure trips. That will take some time to get over in the future. And certainly I'm looking forward to working with the rail industry into promoting rail travel again once we can remove some of the social distancing and capacity is increased. But also post-COVID, we just don't know where we're going to be as a nation financially and where the government's going to focus its attention. I think the indications are that the focus of attention will be on infrastructure. And indeed, the long-term aim is to reduce people's reliance on private motor cars, in which case I think we're in a very good position in Devon and indeed the Southwest to take this forward.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm sure there'll be lots of debate about the post-COVID world in the main session. Right, next, Matt, please, could you give us a brief couple of minutes?
Yes, of course. So we had a discussion about various topics. So COVID obviously came up, and obviously likewise no crystal ball, but obviously there is clearly a stimulus opportunity, economic stimulus, to seize the moment and hopefully secure funding to move forward some of these things, because actually the railway can have a role in economic growth and re-establishing our, as it were, collective sort of progress. Talk about some of the specifics around what some service developments would mean. So East Devon, where loops would be to allow services to run through to Axminster, and whether development of the Barnstaple line might one day lead to thought of going through to Bideford. And I unfortunately, Andrea suggested that the Bideford argument was particularly one for Devon to impart some wisdom to, because we haven't really had a lot of sort of focus on it in the past. Priorities obviously being elsewhere. Decarbonisation and opportunities for sort of rolling stock in the future, what that means for electrification or other rolling stock technologies, and then the capacity agenda really for what obviously Christian talked about from a sort of perspective of, are there any committed plans, and how one might develop the case for improvements on the main line, Exeter, Newton Abbot and so forth.
Thank you very much. Yes, sounds as though you had a full and hectic time there. Right. Christian, could I ask you please to give us a couple of minutes?
Yeah, so we talked about kind of new stations and the need for connectivity within the new housing estates and developments and towns themselves to kind of really promote a metro style system rather than still a reliance on a car to get to those stations, and the need to kind of integrate new stations designs with things like cycle routes and walking routes and existing infrastructure and transport. So that was a good question and a good discussion. We talked about Network Rail's key priorities over the coming control period and into the future. And kind of, I've stated from Network Rail's perspective, resilience is the priority initially, to make sure that we're safeguarding the railway for the future. But that allows us then to start building on the aspirations and desires of the of getting the new services up and running, the new stations mobilising, because that is the backbone to it all. We talked about station costs and opportunities for how can we make stations cheaper, and we talked a little bit around the difference between Newcourt and Marsh Barton and some of the challenges and complexities of one versus the other. So talked a little bit around kind of design and some of the processes that we're doing internally to Network Rail around kind of standardising bridge design and platform design, so that we've got off-the-shelf approved designs and products that are easily deployable and kind of we benefit from that kind of economy of scale and that standardized design process. I also talked about a polystyrene platform that we'd put up in Abergele, up in North Wales coast. But we also talked about kind of the need to make sure the design minimised the amount of disruption to the railway. So obviously the more access to the railway, the more restricted we are in terms of working inefficiently in between trains and on kind of evenings and weekends, and that's really a big driver to cost of building stations. And then finally, again, similar to the conversation sounds like Matt had, it was around decarbonisation and kind of what are the strategies around decarbonisation going forward. And obviously rolling stock options are a key option in there, and whether electrification would make its way down to this part of the world, or certainly other modes of vehicles. But also talking about kind of the key way of supporting decarbonation from a rail industry is to get more people on the rail. And obviously that flies in the face of current governmental advice, but hopefully in the future that will return back to normal, and kind of the initiative of getting more people travelling by rail will certainly aid that agenda. So that kind of covered our group. Brian?
Oh, excellent. Thank you very much. Once again, sounds as though it was a pretty hectic 15 minutes. Yeah, so, Camilla, could I ask you to report back on your group?
Yes. So we had actually an interesting discussion, which was mainly outside of Devon, because we were thinking a lot about the station in Wiltshire, but thinking about the difficulties and constraints about developing perhaps around an existing station. And the example that was given was Melksham in Wiltshire, and thinking about certain problems that it has, which is that it's on a single track railway. It used to have 1 service a day. It's now got 8 services a day, which is an improvement, but it's still a single track line. But it's now the station, which was a sort of single car platform station, is now can accommodate 3 cars. So there have been improvements, but obviously the issue is how do you actually run a significantly better service on a fairly meager system, that the infrastructure not really being adequate to grow. So I mean, and then there are other issues around it, which of course, like having to rebuild bridges, for example, if you're going to expand the station and so on. So we talked a lot about the sort of issues of what exists there and what the opportunities are there, and employment and stuff like that. And what it's very clear is that every station comes with its own problems and its own opportunities, and the choice of which stations you choose to develop or where you choose to put in new stations is very much around actually the feasibility and the ultimate cost. How complicated is it going to be? Does the railway need to be 2-track, 4-track? Does the station need to be massively enlarged? And in which case, you know, does that come with a huge cost that it's not viable? So, I mean, it's ultimately thinking about finding places where you can make these improvements and enhancements without too much impact and requirement for extra infrastructure. So that was kind of where we went around and about, but based in Wiltshire.
All right, okay, thank you very much. I must admit, I was in this group, and one of the statistics about this particular station, Melksham, was that when before the increase in frequency of service, there were 3,000 passengers. Thereafter, there became 75,000 passengers, and the predictions show that it could potentially go up to 250,000 passengers, which is a staggering increase. But it's a good example of showing what, as soon as you start providing a better service, people use it. Right.
Brian,
yes?
Sorry to interrupt. You cut out a bit during when you gave those figures. Could you give those figures for Melksham again?
Yes, that before the improvements in service, 3,000 was the number of users. After the improvements in service that went up to 8 trains a day, it went up to 75,000. And the longer term predictions show that the potential capacity for 250,000. So simply providing bigger trains and more of them produced a dramatic increase in number of users. Right, so this is now the open floor discussion. The floor is yours. Anybody can contribute at this point. If you could let us know, we would appreciate it if you kept your mic muted during the time, if possible, to avoid background noises from animals, cats, creatures, small feet, etc. But when you're speaking, please do unmute your mic. So at this point, I will ask anybody to ask questions or put forward proposals. Do we have a raised hand?
Can I try one? Next year will be the 30th anniversary of the Devon County Council Traffic Calming Guidelines. And this was an absolute landmark publication. I know one of the breakout sessions, there was a discussion about connections within towns and making the railway stations very easily accessible by walking or cycling rather than by car use. I was going to suggest some sort of a celebration, something to mark the publication of that document, which was instrumental in influencing Manual for Streets and indeed the Scottish guidance designing for streets. They actually pinched graphics from the Devon County Council traffic calming guidelines. And well, anyway, so that's one suggestion. It'd be great to celebrate that in some way. And it's something that Devon County Council can be justly proud of. And I suppose the second question is, what can be done to improve conditions for pedestrians and cyclists, given the resource constraints?
Andrea, could you comment upon the the facilities at Devon County Council for producing such a landmark document, please?
Yes, I have to say I haven't actually looked at this, but I've written myself a note so that I go and find it post haste and better have a look at it as it's so famous. Killy hadn't ever reached North Devon or Exmoor. So at the moment we're inviting people to come with their suggestions. The Prime Minister announced a large amount of money last week for active cities and getting people on their bicycles and walking more. And that's been a long-held aspiration of Devon County Council anyway. So you can go to our website. I can send anybody the link if they want to email me and put in your suggestions for Devon. So we'll be focusing on commuter type cycling and walking rather than the sort of long distance paths. This is about getting people out their cars, doing their regular journeys by other modes of transport rather than using their private motor car. So, I think the future looks great for Devon. We've always been really very active about trying to get more people cycling, and our cycling network's brilliant. Obviously, it's a very, very rural county. I'm not expecting to see anything in my patch, to be honest. We are totally reliant on the private motor car, but that's the way it is. But if I go to Exeter, it's very easy to cycle around. And the new development I mentioned that is likely to come to the other side of the station, that is being planned to be totally car free. So those people that move into the development there will be looking to use public transport. They will be able to easily, because of Marsh Barton, get on a train and easily get around the city. And I think that's a blueprint to how we ought to be looking at some of our other towns in Devon.
Well, that sounds immensely encouraging.
And
Thank you very much.
Can I make
yes, I like the idea of car-free developments in that part of the world. Yeah.
a personal invite? Would the councillor like to be involved in some sort of celebratory event next year?
I'd have to. I don't want to be sad about this, but I daren't commit ourselves to anything because I just simply do not know what's going to happen. I think the first thing I'm going to do is go and find these traffic calming guidelines and look at it. But yes, if there is something going on that we can be involved in, I haven't got a problem with that at all. But I can't commit the county council to anything at the moment until we are sure where we are with the things that we need to get on with, and that in my area it's building infrastructure and making sure our waste services are working properly post-COVID. Sorry.
No costs, sort of event like this, I think.
Oh, no, that's absolutely fine, and I'm very happy to be involved.
Brilliant, wonderful, thank you.
Right, well, thank you very much, Robert. Next person would like to comment.
Yeah. The government's £500 million funding for rail rebuilding schemes, could I just clarify, was that money to fund feasibility studies, or was it actually to be put towards the rebuilding work of the chosen scheme? Do we know how it's meant to work?
To whom?
I don't know
this
who
question
would,
directed? Is it me? Ah, right. Has anybody?
anybody who knows the answer.
Yeah.
I can probably pick that up with probably a little bit. So the Restoring Your Railway Fund is the Beach and Reversal Fund from the government. It's kind of got three legs. Leg one is an ideas fund. So anyone can kind of apply for up to £50,000 worth of funding for initial concept development for any kind of idea associated with restoration of railway assets. The second one is accelerating of existing proposals. So where there might be a scheme such as kind of Wellington and Cullompton, or kind of Tavistock or Oakhampton, or those kind of schemes where there's been a lot of development done historically, that is where an application can go, and there's no particular cap in terms of the amount available. And the third part is around new stations. So either opening new stations or reopening old stations, or enhancing existing stations to make them as good as once they were, what they once upon a time were. So there's three kind of pots that kind of make up the 500 million, and it's controlled and governed by the DFT, and the application process is via a local MP to kind of submit in any application.
Okay, thank you. So this funding is being used for the schemes being discussed here, is it?
So there's been no decision on any funding as of yet. So applications have gone in, but we haven't had any decision at all from the DFT, and they're obviously preoccupied at the moment with current COVID response. So we're hopeful for some kind of notifications about what might get funded, what might not in the next kind of few months, but we don't have any information at all at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and just to clarify, this isn't only for desk studies and feasibility studies. It will actually include real money for ballast and rails and bricks and mortar.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, so the accelerating existing proposals is for implementation, essentially, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent, thank you. And next question, please.
How do I'd like to ask about money, because it seems to me the key constraint is going to be the resources to fund improvements. And I'd like to ask about the potential for tapping the uplift in land values that comes from upgrading railway services, and to ask Andrea what work is being done to find out the impact of the upgrade, the new station, on the desirability of living in Cranbrook, and the amount of money that could be possibly tapped to have paid for the station or improved services in other places.
I don't know if I've been switched on. Have I been switched on?
Yes, we can
Yeah,
hear
sorry.
I can hear you, Andrea.
Sorry, because I've lost all connectivity. I have got nothing to look at, so I can't tell you. So so Cranbrook was part funded by Section 106 contributions, and this is why we plan ahead. So when we look to improve stations, or we want to put new stations in, we are looking at the local plans from our district colleagues and seeing where we can tap into any 106 payments, and at an early stage, and work very closely with Matt and Christian so that we can talk about where they know where the growth is as far as rail journeys are concerned, and I know where the growth is as far as populations are concerned, and also know about where industry and businesses are going to be, so we can sort of predict where people's journeys are going to be. So yeah, we do tap into 106 contributions a lot, and we obviously always keeping our eye open for new funds that come along, and we were very quick off the mark to put in applications to the Restoring Your Railway Fund.
I was suggesting that the need is not to take more money from the developer, but to get money from the increase in land values, which may mean looking at the rating system, but at least finding out what the impact was on house values. So do you have any feeling for how much more houses are worth because of the improved rail service at Cranbrook compared with an equivalent area elsewhere?
I have to say that the houses in Cranbrook tend not to be that expensive. I think it isn't just about the access to the railway. There's all sorts of other things that you'd take into account if you were going to move there. obviously it's very popular with young people. I mean, I'll have to go and look if any studies been gone into it. There's many studies gone into Cranbrook, but generally focusing around the demographic and the facilities, and to be honest, the health outcomes. I was very involved with health outcomes, and probably that could have been done better about providing health facilities in that really rather disconnected place, except for buses and trains. And as for the rateable value of properties, that isn't something the council has control over. That is done by the inspectorate, and they do that. We don't do that. It sounds bizarre, but it's good that it's separate, because otherwise we'd all have an interest in obviously raising everybody's council tax payments quite a lot.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Any further questions?
Ryan, I see that Patrick Cusson has raised his hand, so he probably would like to ask a question.
Okay,
so
Patrick.
me just, he's unmuted.
Hello, good afternoon. Following the application for the government funding for restoration of currently disused lines, can we be more optimistic now than we were perhaps 12 months ago for the restoration of Burost and Tavistock? That was very much sidelined about 12 months ago.
Yeah. Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Yep. Yes. So, well, we can be as optimistic as we can be in this uncertain time that we're living through. Certainly, the bid's in. Working very closely with Matt and Christian to take it forward. But until we get some announcement from the government, obviously, we can't do any more. So, can I say, the question was, am I more optimistic than 12 months ago? Supremely so, yes. I'm much more confident that we might actually get somewhere.
Because clearly many studies have already been undertaken, engineering studies and so on and so forth. And as you all know, as a county councillor, the land is mostly in your ownership.
Yeah.
Structures are in good condition for their age. So I would have hoped it may be a front runner, but who knows?
Well, I'm looking forward to travelling on a train all the way to Tavistock.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm going to live long enough, but
I'm sure you will. Keep breathing. That's the trick.
Well, as long as I stay indoors, I should be safe.
Yeah, so social distancing and washing hands is what we need to do.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Brian, I have one other question.
One more question, I think.
Do you want me to raise that with you? Okay.
Yes,
the question came from John Webb, and it said, could light rail be piggybacked about an existing railway? Could a main line dip under bridges, though existing tunnels could be a problem unless they could be double-decked? I don't know whether John wanted to cut in with that at all.
No, you said it. Thank you.
So your main question is it possible to run a light rail somehow in conjunction with heavy rail? Is that the core question?
Well, it's more a matter of whether it can be put above the existing railway. For instance, in an embankment, you could easily imagine this. Across the countryside, the implications of cutting out the view, you get to a problem when you get to a bridge or tunnel, unless the main line can dip underneath that. But it's really likewise, putting cycleways alongside existing railway lines, it's a matter of trying to increase capacity where there are at present bottlenecks or even a single line, as in the case of Melton. Thank you.
Right. Would either Matt or Christian have a response to that, please?
Well, as I haven't answered any, I'm happy to pick it up. So clearly, light rail running on the current heavy rail routes is something that's has been done in Europe and tried elsewhere, but it comes with its challenges. Putting them above, well, the simple answer is you would need to go a long way down to be able to fit them through a tunnel. So much so that you'd be essentially building new tunnels, which of course is possible, but at an enormous cost. But in terms of cycle routes, I think, clearly Devon has extensive experience of delivering cycle routes alongside railway lines, because that's exactly what we've got along much of the ex-estuary trail. that is mostly on greenfield land, and that tends to be the better way to do it. On alignments where there's a former double track line, for example, and one wants to put a cycle route alongside, it often seems like a great idea, but actually the envelope required is quite significant, not least because one of the things that we've learned as an industry is you don't want to hem things in too much, because when anything breaks, it's a lot easier to maintain a railway and keep the services running as much as possible, getting into Christian's area, if you have enough room. So there are often challenges, but putting cycle routes alongside, if they're physically separate, that's certainly something that's been done and can be done more of where there is the physical space to do so.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, presumably it's possible to integrate cycle routes into emergency maintenance areas, isn't it? It can actually be beneficial in certain respect. All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody. We're coming towards the end of our time. Obviously, the great question is, what do we do from here in terms of COVID and so forth? And I must admit, like probably everybody else, when the first, the current restrictions on the use of public transport were initially introduced, I was somewhat despondent. However, I'm beginning to think that actually, like so many things, it could turn out to be a blessing in disguise, because what is happening throughout the country is that public transport providers are being asked to increase the frequency of their services and the capacity of what they're doing in order to compensate for social distancing. And so maybe in a few months' time, we'll have got used to the idea of running a lot more buses and a lot more trains, and the government will have given the money to make this happen, and then say, well, okay, over to you, we've done it, you use them. So it could well be that in the long term, this turns out to be very beneficial. I trust that is so. Thank you for everybody who's sent their email in. Just a final reminder that if you wish to be included in the list, do send your email in now. We are having future events this afternoon. This is the first of selection. The next will be Northumberland line, which is connected to or an extension of the Tyne and Wear metro, although it is not being developed by them, it's being developed by Northumberland County Council. And that will take place on Wednesday, the 24th of June, subject to everything coming together, but that's our current target. In July, we'll be looking at Metro West, which is Bristol. August, the Rochdale Rail Corridor, where there are lots of proposals there to dramatically increase the number of settlements around existing stations and to introduce new stations. And then finally, in September, we'll be looking at the Oxford Metro and all the proposals there. So do watch this space, do please stay engaged. You will be notified as these things come along and of anything else that is relevant. I would like to express enormous thanks to our speakers, all of whom have been absolutely superb and demonstrated a great deal of understanding, knowledge and ability. So thank you very much. I would, under normal circumstances, be asking you to clap, but I don't think it's entirely appropriate in these. But do please accept all our thanks. Yeah, and stay in touch. So I trust that you will all have a wonderful evening. It's certainly here in Kent spectacularly beautiful, and I think probably across most of the country it's pretty nice. So do go out and enjoy it. Thank you very much for attending and look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you.
Okay. Cheers. All right. Excellent stuff. Yeah, so you've obviously got